Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday Asbill season meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Murph from California, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing, or if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Murph. It's wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Hey, everybody, Murph, alcoholic. I love you guys. I love the meetings out here where you're at. It's just, you're so welcoming, and it's just it's a beautiful way to start the day, even though it is 5 o'clock in the morning where I'm at. So I'm not quite awake yet. The reading really struck me. There's on page 100 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a promise there. And this reading encompasses this promise like so beautifully. And it says that if we follow the dictates of a higher power, we will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what our present circumstances are. Where it's telling me that no matter what's going on in life, no matter what kind of tragedy you're facing or anything, that you can get through it if you're connected to God. This is a God program. God's mentioned 134 times in the first 164 pages. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous thinking I had a problem with God, but I was to find out I didn't have a problem with God. I never had a God. I had a problem with your God. So if you're sitting there and you're having a problem with God, or you're having trouble with the higher power thing, ask yourself, is it someone else's higher power that you're having a problem with? Is it somewhere you were taught as a youth that you're having a problem with, or someone else in the rooms that's talked about their God that you're having a problem with? Or are you just following the group that you're with? So I have to have a surrender in step one, and it's got to be a complete surrender. And it's got to be a surrender of all my ideas, of everything I think I know about AA, everything I think I know about life, the whole schmear. And I have to buy into AA 100%. And what happens is it opens up the door for the idea of God to come in. And once that is begun, where my sponsor had me write on 2 sheets of paper, on one sheet of paper, it was everything that God would be if there was a God. And then on the other sheet of paper, everything that God would not be if there was a God. And I was able to take that negative, damning, hell and brimstone God and toss him in the trash. And then I was able to, put down on that piece of paper what God would be if I thought there was a God. And it was love. And it was, would comfort me, would keep me safe, would want me to have things in abundance, would be something that I could go to in all areas of my life. And I started seeking and searching, and that's where the seeking and searching starts. It's part of my job is to start seeking and searching a power that's going to be comfortable to me. I can't sit on my butt on the sofa watching Netflix expecting God to change my life for me. My sponsor had this beautiful thing. He used to say that God loves us so much, he won't enter our lives without our permission. So all I had to do was ask God in. And in this portion of the book, it tells me, that where and how I'm to find God. And if I seek fearlessly and search diligently, that I'll find God deep within myself. And so God is here inside of me. My brother, I talk about my brother all the time. My brother is someone that I hated my entire life and ended up being somebody that I aspired to be like. He spent his last 48 years of his life in prison. He passed away in prison, and he was sober 47 years of that time. And he said to me that prison, or that alcoholism is a prison that unlocks from the inside. This program has to be worked from the inside out. It can't be worked from the outside in. Because no matter what I get on the outside, no matter how many things I acquire, no matter how many girlfriends I have, or how much money I have, it's not going to fix the hole that's inside of me that needs to be filled. That can only be filled from a power greater than myself. And so these steps enable me to find that power that's going to solve my problem. And here's where the catchy part is. My problem is not alcohol, and my problem is not drugs. They're a problem, but they're not the problem. The problem centers in my mind. The problem is how I think and how I perceive things. And that's what needs to be treated. And so I get to the third step after my mind has been opened up to God, and after I've started to seek out God, or the God of my understanding, and then I'm able to turn my will and my life, my thinking, my actions over to the care of this power, which means that until I've had that spiritual awakening, which is what we're all looking for here, I run things by people that in my life that have a God, that have done the steps, that are living a happy, joyous, and free life outside of the rooms of AA. And I run things by them at this point. And so when I got to the fourth step this time, I went in on God's will. It was the first time that I had gone into the fourth step on God's will. You know, that step that we all think is so, we have so much fear of that step. And that step is just a fact-finding step. And I'm finding facts about myself that keep me from this power. And since I went into this with God in mind, for the first time, I was able to look at certain people that I wasn't willing to ever forgive before. My father came up. I had a big problem with my father. The hatred there was it was unbelievably thick, how much I hated him, and I hated him my entire life. And my sponsor at the time asked me, he goes, Murph, instead of, looking at what your father did to you, why don't you look at what happened to your father? Why don't you start asking questions of family members? And I was able to go to uncles and aunts, and I was able to go to actually people that I knew were friends with him, and find out some things about him, and things that were so far beyond what I had ever experienced myself. He was a man that was in so much pain, and he was an alcoholic. And because I brought God into this step, I was able to forgive a man I had hated for 40 plus years. And I never even knew his story. We sit around here, and somebody comes at us, or somebody yells at us, and our first reaction is to lash out at them because, it's about me. I'm taking it personally. But through this experience with my father, I found out that everybody has a different story for each day that they're in, and that each 24-hour period is going to be different. And if I take something personally from somebody, the next day I may not get to experience a beautiful experience with them, because they're in a different frame of mind, because they're not in a bad mood because of something that had happened to them, that prior day. And so each day is an experience that I get. Each day is different. Each person that I run into is going to be different. Even if it's the same person, they're still going to be different the next day. So that 24-hour period will become way important in a little bit. But I did all my amends, and I'm hearing the siren. I wonder if I'm too loud out here. But, I get to 6 and 7, and I realize that they're none of my business. 6 and 7, they're none of my business. And that's the crazy part, because I hear people all the time, the guys that I work with, I'm working on my character defects, and I just start laughing at them. I'm saying, if you're working on your character defects, good luck. Because one thing that I can't change as an alcoholic that I found out over the years is I can't change a behavior. If I'm procrastinating on something and I'm trying to work on procrastination, I'm working on the wrong thing, because I found out that these things that I thought were character defects were the outward reaction to the real defect of character. And I found that in the fourth column of the fourth step. It's fear, self-centeredness, self-seeking, and dishonesty. And each one of my character defects derived from one of those four things, and 95% of it is fear. And I always, even no matter what I'm talking about, to the people that haven't heard this from me, fear is an illusion, people. Fear is not real. Fear is something that we make up in our heads trying to figure out the solution to something. My favorite acronym is future events already ruined. I can ruin something that's about to come up before weeks before it even happens. And so this is the step where I begin to begin to let God have the results of everything. This is a step where I start to do the work concerning any situation, and I leave the results to God. God has it. And whatever result that God has for me is 10 times better than the result that I can think of for myself. And so I learned that I have no idea what character defects and character assets are, because a lot of the times my character defects turned out to be assets and my character assets turned out to be defects. So it's not my job to pick and choose whether they're good or bad, whether it could have worked out differently, or try to manipulate the ending of it because it didn't work out the way I thought. One of the great examples is I just lost my train of thought. One of the great examples was that procrastination. I was procrastinating on going to college. I had never been in a family that stressed education or anything like that. So for myself, I wanted to see if I could do college, but I kept procrastinating on it. Each year would go by and I would procrastinate on it. And what happened was my sponsor looked at me one day and he said, "What's wrong with you? You're not your jovial self, Murph." And I said, I procrastinated on going to school again." And he said to me, he goes, "You think procrastination is your problem?" And I said, "Well, of course it is. I keep putting it off. That's called procrastination." He goes, "What are you afraid of?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "What are you afraid of?" And we sat down and I ran my fears past him. I was afraid I wouldn't make the grade. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to make the grade. I wouldn't be able to finish. And he said, "So you've never been in a college class, you've never opened a college book, and you know you're not going to be able to make the grade?" And that was what fear was. That fear was a lie that I was telling myself. And if I repeat those lies over and over, they start to affect my life as if they're the truth. So I believed that I couldn't make the grade. The funny one was he asked me how I said I couldn't afford college. I was afraid I couldn't afford college. He asked me how much it cost. I said, "I don't know." So I didn't even know how much college cost, and yet I was afraid that I couldn't afford college. And after I went through all my fears and gave them to God, I was empty. I had nothing there. I was in a place of peace concerning the situation. And all of a sudden, this intuitive thought came to me. That intuition that we're talking about in step 9, the intuitive thought came to me. "Why don't you call your buddy Rob, Smiley Rob?" And so I called Smiley Rob because he had went to college, and Smiley Rob said, "Sure, I'll help you out." And we gets on the computer, and 2 days later, I was enrolled in college. Procrastination was not my problem. That was the outward reaction to what the real problem was, and that was fear. And I was able to go through college, and I had a 3.9 grade point average through college. And so that's a perfect example of that fear that I had that I couldn't make the grade. That was a perfect example of what a lie it was. And so we live our lives in all these fears, just riddled with ideas that I can't do something, that I'll never be loved, that I'll never be liked, that I'm ugly, that I'm fat, every other possible thing that I can, say about myself. And they're all lies. And I need God to quiet my mind enough to where I can see the lie. And so the way we conquer fear, if you're afraid of something, the way we conquer fear is with the truth. That's how fear is conquered. I need to see the truth in any situation. And so I started to learn, and it took time because it's a practice. It took time for me to get to a place where I could just do the work and give it to God and let him have it. And it was a beautiful thing because, I ran across a person who was so mad that they had not gotten a job. They had worked, over and over and over again for this job. And they were talking to me about it and how God hates me. I didn't get the job. I was perfect. I had the best interview ever. I didn't get the job. I'm never going to get a job. And I'm just looking at him and I'm letting him go on with what he has to say. And we talked for a little bit. And 6 months down the road, he gets this job. And it's the greatest job that he says it's the greatest job I've ever had in my life. And I go, oh, so that's why God didn't give you that job. That's why you didn't get that job back then. It wasn't a bad thing. It was the best thing that could have happened to you because now you have something that you love doing. And so it's different things like that happen if we allow time. If we allow these things in our life to play out, if we quit trying to get in the middle of the result. And that's what I got out of 6 and 7. And so, I found out that if I take care of the fears, if I see where I was dishonest and self-seeking and self-centered, whatever the outward reaction is takes care of itself. I stopped being angry, right? I stopped procrastinating, and I didn't work on it at all. I didn't work on those things at all. I just worked on those 4 things that I was talking about. And so then I get to steps 8 and 9. Step 8, I get the list from my step 4, from the 4th column in the 4th step. And there may be some that you add, or that, there were a couple that I added that weren't on that list. And then I commenced to make amends. I'll tell you that this brother that I was talking about that I hadn't seen in 17 years, he had been gone or more than that probably, since I was a kid. My sister, his daughter, who we adopted, found him she found him in prison. And she asked me when she found him if he could write me. And I didn't care at the time. And I said, I don't care. He's part of I'm the victim of what he did. And if he would have stayed around, things would have been different in my life, these excuses that we make. And I would get a letter from him. And in that letter, it said I was wrong not to be your big brother, and that I was wrong to leave you with your father, and a few other wrongs. And he said, is there anything I could do to make this right? And at the time, I'm sitting there going, but this sounds really familiar. And I didn't know it at the time that he had been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for 16 of the 17 years he was in prison at that time. And I wrote this nasty letter back to him. And he wrote me another letter back, and he said, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. And I thank God that you were brought into my life, because today I feel freer than I've ever felt before. That brother gained a freedom behind bars from that amends step. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I got, was an amends that was made to me, not the amends that I made. Another one of the amends was this guy that I knew we were going. I knew right when he opened that door, it was going to be time. I had the right hand cocked. I was setting myself up, and I went there and I knocked on the door. Now this is an amends that I had already figured out what was going to happen. And remember in 6 and 7 where I said we don't do that, we don't look at the results. Well, I jumped into the results, and I knew what was going to happen. And when I knocked on that door and it opened up, he was standing there, and it was like a shocked look on his face that I was there. But he didn't come like at me. He didn't come at me. And I told him, I was an alcoholic, and that part of me recovering is to make right my wrongs. And I told him I was wrong that I hit you, and this and that. And he looked at me square in the eyes, and he said, I was a complete asshole at that time. I probably deserved getting hit. And he said, I'm an alcoholic too, and I've been sober for 5 years. And that result was completely different than the one that I had thought was going to happen. We're great friends from that process. So when it came to the amends, you know, there are amends that we think are going to be so painful, and they turn out to be the most beautiful things that, we've ever gone through. Don't write letters in your amends. If you can make that amends face to face, do it. Just think of, I wouldn't have had that experience if I'd have tried to write him a letter or text, or emailed him or whatever the case may be. This is a personal step. This is a step where I become free. And with each amends I do, I become freer. And that's why my brother would say, I have freedom behind bars. And that's why my brother, in the last letter that I received from him, said that I'm going to die happy, joyous, and free. A man in prison was going to die free. Wow, these steps are amazing. And the minute I began that first amends that I would make would be to my mother, but the first amends that I made, that's when I start 10 and 11. I don't wait until I'm finished with step 9 to start step 10 and step 11. Because in that time if I wait till I'm done with that step, in that time, that recuperative power of the ego can come back, take over, and then I'm running my life on my own power again. And terrible things happen when that happens. And so I start on this 10th step. And the 10th step tells me that I get a daily reprieve contingent upon my spiritual connection. To those that have relapsed, and I'm one of them. And I'm one of them that thought that I was relapsing because I thought I relapsed because I stopped going to meetings. And I thought I relapsed because I stopped doing commitments. And I thought I relapsed because I didn't have any sponsees. And that wasn't the case. That's not why I relapsed. Some people think they relapse because somebody dies in their family, or an animal of theirs gets hurt, or whatever the case may be. But that doesn't happen. In this reading, it talks about there are things that I need to do after having that spiritual awakening. And part of that is in step 10. But the reason why we relapse is because we fail to grow spiritually, because I stopped growing spiritually. It talks about, resting on our laurels. It says we can't rest on our laurels. My sponsor would tell me that our laurels are our yesterdays. I can't rest on my yesterdays, because they're not going to do me any good in this day, which is the most important day of my life, is the day that I'm in right now, in this moment, with you people, sitting on a mansion sofa right here, right? This is the best time. And so what do I get? So I get a daily reprieve contingent upon my spiritual connection. What do I get a reprieve from? You know how many years I was in AA before I asked that question? I get a daily reprieve, but I never knew what the reprieve was from. And the reprieve is from that negative self-talking mind. I get a daily reprieve from that mind that chatters to me day and night about what's going on wrong with the world, about what political party that people are in, or what football team that that should have won that didn't win last week, and on and on and on and on and on. And do you know how much time is wasted in our heads that could be used to be having enjoyment during that day? Hours of my day I saw was wasted. So I get this mind that gets to, like, work on beautiful things, on positive things. I used to take this walk every single day where I live in Burlingame, and it was the same walk. And I did that walk for 5 years or more, the same route. And one day I looked to my right and I saw this baseball field where kids were playing on it. And I loved baseball and I used to coach it. And my grandfather played baseball professionally, right, for the Yankees and the Cubs, which was a great thing. And I get there and I start watching these kids playing baseball. And I look at this lady that's standing next to me and I go, this is great. How long has this field been here? She said 30 years. I was so into my own thoughts that I would walk by this place and I never saw it. And that's what we get a reprieve from. My head started to look up and I started to see things around me because I wasn't looking down in my head. It says we pause when agitated or doubtful. A lot of us forget about the doubtful one, right? Some of us are able to pause when we're agitated. When I get angry, I step back, I look at the situation, right? I let myself know and that it's not personal. I get God into it really quickly. And so the doubtful part is, there's a lot of doubt in our life, especially, new in AA. And when I'm in doubt, instead of doing something rash or something that comes straight out of my head in that moment, I get to step back and bring God into it. This is the part of our program that we start bringing God into a conscious contact as much as we can throughout our day. A friend taught me, I heard about this a little while ago and I've started to do it. What do I do a lot in a day? Well, he said, he was a salesman, so he was in his car all the time. So he would open his car, door and get in many times during the day. And he said to himself, every time that I open that car door, I talk to God. And so he started opening his door and he started talking to God. And talking to God is prayer. Anytime I'm in a communication with God, I'm in prayer. Any relationship that I'm in takes communication. Think about, if your spouse, your married spouse, never talked to you, what that would be like, what kind of relationship it would be like. And it's the same thing with my relationship with God. That power starts to get strength the more I do these things that are directed to me from 84 to 86, which is what this is all about right here. And so I started practicing that. And it says that we watch for fear, that we watch for self-centeredness, that we watch for self-seeking, that we watch for dishonesty. And it says when these things crop up, it doesn't say if these things crop up. It says when these things crop up. That means it's going to happen. I'll never be so spiritual as I stop being human. I'm going to make mistakes throughout the day. I'm going to forget, right? But mistakes are portals to discovery. I love that quote. And each mistake that I make, which will happen in the next step, I can see, right, and learn from. Learn so I don't make that mistake again. And so I start to watch for those things throughout my day. I take care of amends if I need to take care of it that day. I don't wait on them, right? I do it right away because I don't want those things festering and I don't want those things turning into resentments. And you know what resentments do to us. It says it in the book, in the 4 steps. These things will kill us. And so if I keep God with me and I communicate with God, I'm less likely to have resentments and I'm less likely to fall back into Murph being the power. And so I do these things daily in that 24-hour period. And when does daily start? The minute I open my eyes. In the morning, when my eyes open, I talk about my lineage. The vultures are standing on the bedposts. I always talk about these guys. They're standing on the bedpost and they're looking down, waiting for me to open up my eyes. And when my eyes open up, hey, let's talk about how unappreciated you are at work. Let's talk about how the girlfriend disrespected you last night. Let's talk about this and let's talk about that. And before you can get your foot off the bed, I'm into self. And so I surrender every morning when my eyes open up. I'm Murph. I'm an alcoholic and I can't run my own life. It doesn't work. It never has and it never will. And I align myself with God. I ask God in. God gave us brains to use. If I keep that aligned with God, I can do anything. Anything. There's nothing that I can't do. I use my brains. I don't have to run things past a sponsor every time I do something now, right? I'm an independent man who's so happy and joyous and free. I don't need to do that. Now, there are times where I will, but as a regular, I can remember the newcomers, like every day they're calling their sponsor with something, right? My sponsor couldn't fix me. My sponsor could not keep me sober. My sponsor could not make me drink. What my sponsor did was carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's only one message in Alcoholics Anonymous. One. And that's a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's the message I carry to alcoholics. It tells me that in the 12th step. That's the message I carry. I carry the message of a spiritual awakening, a complete shift in the way I think and the way I perceive things, a complete 360-degree shift. And it's amazing what this shift does, because that father that I hated for all those years, my perception was wrong about it. I wasted all that time and all those hours and days, despising this man. And it was my perception that was off. And I need God in my life to see these things. So I bring God in right away in the morning. I ask God to direct my thinking right away in the morning. The thinking is my problem. So if God directs my thinking, I can be okay, right? I ask him to, that it be divorced from self-pity. Self-pity is the highest form of self-centeredness. Boy, does the alcoholic love self-pity. Good God, they love it. The alcoholic eats self-pity up, right? It's better than a new car. We love that self-pity, boy. But self-pity is the highest form of self-centeredness. And if self-centered fear is the root of my problem, I have to be rid of that, right? I have to be rid of that. And I do that through God. And I ask to be divorced from anger, from resentment. I ask to be divorced from dishonesty, from self-seeking, from self-searching. I think we all come in here trauma-based. Each and every one of us has had a trauma that has gone on in our life that caused us to have to shut this thing off, right? And each one of our traumas is different, and none of our traumas can be judged by another person, even though people do that. What happened to you as an individual, what happened to me is different than what happened to them, but the feelings are the same, right? I came in here because I felt terrible about myself. And so through those things that ego's created, the ego creates the false self that talks to you, that tells you those bad things, that tells you lies. And I get into Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is the place where that self is changed to my true self. That self, the old self, wants me separated from my friends, from God, and from my true self. Now I find my true self, and my true self is God-given. And so I start my day out like that every single day. I read literature. I read different literature every day. If you're reading the same thing every day, saying the same prayer every day, it becomes rote talk. It becomes parroting. I start to lose, right? What that certain prayer or whatever it is that I'm doing, I start to lose. It loses its luster and it just becomes verbal. My sponsor used to say that if you parrot your prayers, you're going to stay locked in the cage. And I was like, oh, wow. So keep it exciting. Read different stuff. Go on YouTube. Search spiritual speakers. Just pick one. And by doing that on a daily basis, I got to add to my God. That sheet of paper that only had 5 things on it, love, what God would be if there was a God. It's over a page and a half now because I've added things and my God has grown. And so, like I said, I have to keep it exciting because the minute it becomes dull to me is the minute that I stop doing it. And if I tell myself one morning, oh my God, I got to work early, I'm rushed, I can't do it this morning. I've learned if I don't do it today, I'm less likely to do it tomorrow. And so I have to make it a priority every single morning on awakening to do these things, to meditate. It says prayer and meditation. It doesn't say prayer or meditation. If you're having trouble meditating, do it for 30 seconds. Practice it for 30 seconds each day. Another great YouTube thing. Go on YouTube and look up different meditation practices. There's all kinds of them. Find one that fits you because you don't know what you're missing by not meditating. Meditation is listening for God, and God comes to me through intuition. And I can't have an intuitive thought if I'm thinking. Meditation removes the thoughts. I see them passing through. I let them go. Here, God, let them go. Here, God, until all those thoughts are gone, and then I'm in a place of peace. And that's where that intuitive thought comes to me. It doesn't come to me. God does not talk to me, right? God does not verbally go, hey, Murph, what's up? God speaks to me through my heart and through my stomach. Before I retire at night. And it doesn't mean the second before I'm ready to go to sleep. It can be done 2 hours before I go to bed when I'm still awake. But before I retire at night, I have to look back at my day. I have to look and see where was I afraid today? Where was I dishonest today? Where was I self-seeking today? And where was I selfish today? There comes those 4 things again. The things that I watch for in 10, I have to look back and see them. Because as I see the patterns of my day, I can remove them. Ask God to remove them. I have to be aware of them. Once I'm aware of them, God will remove it if it's of use to my fellows and to my God. It goes back again to step 7, being none of my business, right? I don't label things as good and bad or good or bad anymore. They just are, right? Because I'm usually wrong on the bad ones. They usually turn out good. And I'm usually wrong on the good ones. They turn out bad. So I stay out of God's job, the good and bad part. And that makes life, again, so much easier. I don't have to wrestle with that kind of thing. And so as I'm looking back and as I'm clearing my mind of all this negativity starts to go away and I start to become freer and freer and freer. But it's again, I cannot not do these. I have to do these things every day. It tells me in the book what I need to do every single day in order to keep that spiritual connection. And as long as I'm connected spiritually, my life is beautiful. It's incredible. And it allows me to work with other men. There is nothing in my life that brings me more joy than to see a man's eyes light up. There's nothing more joyful to me than to see a man have his spiritual awakening. You see, there's a quote that goes, God can bring me joy without things, but things without God will never bring me joy. This is where God becomes so entrenched inside of me that no matter what I have, I don't have a lot, but I love what I have. I'm grateful for everything that God has given me. Everything that I have is rented from God. It can be taken from me at any second. And I know this today. So I need these practices. I need these things in order to stay spiritually grown and order to for this, regardless of worldly success or failure, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, even death itself, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing, if I am willing to continue this spiritual awakening. And that's how I continue it. I continue it through steps 10, through steps 11, through steps 12. One, done. Thank you.